The Boston Campaign was a series of battles and events that took place from 1775 to 1776 during the American Revolutionary War. The campaign was a significant turning point in the war, as it marked the first time that the British Army faced significant resistance from the American colonial forces. The campaign included several key battles and events, including the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Siege of Boston, and the evacuation of British troops from the city. Background: in 1774, tensions between the American colonies and the British Empire had reached a boiling point. The British government had passed a series of punitive measures, including the Intolerable Acts, which were intended to punish the colonists for their defiance. The colonists responded by organizing a boycott of British goods and forming a militia. In April 1775, the British Army attempted to seize colonial weapons and ammunition stored in Concord, Massachusetts. This led to the famous battles of Lexington and Concord, which marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. The Battle of Bunker Hill. On June 17, 1775, the British Army attempted to break the colonial siege of Boston by launching an attack on colonial forces stationed on Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill. The attack was led by General William Howe and included over 2,000 British troops. The colonial forces, led by General Israel Putnam and Colonel William Prescott, were heavily outnumbered and outgunned. However, they were able to hold off the British attack for several hours, inflicting heavy casualties on the British troops. Eventually, the colonial forces ran out of ammunition and were forced to retreat. The British won the battle, but at a significant cost. They suffered over 1,000 casualties, including 226 killed and 828 wounded. The colonial forces suffered 140 killed and 271 wounded. The Siege of Boston. Following the Battle of Bunker Hill, the colonial forces continued to lay siege to Boston, cutting off the city from the rest of the world. The British Army, under the command of General Thomas Gage, was trapped in the city and unable to receive reinforcements or supplies. The colonial forces, led by General George Washington, used the siege to train and organize their troops, while also putting pressure on the British forces inside the city. The British attempted several unsuccessful counterattacks, including an unsuccessful attack on Dorchester Heights in March 1776. Evacuation of Boston. In March 1776, General Howe replaced General Gage as the commander of the British forces in Boston. Howe realized that the British were in a precarious position, and that they needed to evacuate the city before the colonial forces could launch a successful attack. On March 17, 1776, Howe launched a surprise attack on the colonial forces stationed at Dorchester Heights. However, the colonial forces were able to repel the attack, and Howe realized that he would need to evacuate the city. On March 17, the British began evacuating their troops and supplies from the city. The evacuation took several days, but it was ultimately successful. The British left behind several hundred loyalists, who were evacuated to Halifax, Nova Scotia. Impact. The Boston Campaign was a significant turning point in the American Revolutionary War. It marked the first time that the British Army faced significant resistance from the colonial forces. The Battle of Bunker Hill, in particular, was a morale booster for the colonial forces, who had previously been considered to be no match for the British Army. The Siege of Boston was also significant, as it allowed the colonial forces to gain valuable experience and training, while also putting pressure on the British forces in the city. The evacuation of Boston was a major victory for the colonial forces, as it forced the British to abandon a strategic stronghold and gave the colonists control of the city.